Hello, and thanks for sticking around for this Q&A for Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America, which is playing as part of IFFBoston 2021. I'm Brian Tam. I'm the Executive Director here at IFFBoston, and it's my great pleasure to welcome some special guests. So please welcome Emily and Sarah Kunstler.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Welcome to Jeffery Robinson.
Thank you for having me.
And to moderate from WBUR, please welcome Adrian Ma.
Thank you very much.
Hi all. We're very much looking forward to this conversation. So Adrian, I'm going to kick it off to you.
I watched the film this week, and I was really blown away by it. I thought this was like a really powerful, I guess it's all in the name, right? It's a chronicle of racism in America. And I guess my first question that I really want to know from I guess anyone who wants to take it first is like, where did the idea to do this film come from, and to do it in this format?
I think Jeff should take that, because this film is really this talk, right? So I think we should get to how this talk came about, right?
Well, I mean, thanks, Sarah. And I didn't plan on making a movie when I started researching this talk. I was just doing research into the history of anti-Black racism in America, and I kept finding things. And as I put this presentation together, I was giving it around the country. And my plan was to give it to as many people as I possibly could, because I felt like if people saw this, they would start to have different thoughts about the narrative of American history when it comes to anti-Black racism. That is one thing I want to say. The film is titled A Chronicle of Racism in America, not The Chronicle of Racism in America, because The Chronicle involves many other groups that have experienced prejudice and discrimination. But as I made my talks around the country, I just so happened to do one in New York City in April of 2017. And I gave the talk, and it just so happened that Sarah was in the audience, and we started talking after that, and that's where the film came from.
And what was your pitch in terms of turning this talk into a film?
I mean, first, let me say that Jeff's talk changed my life. It's really a recentering of American history as a story of anti-Black racism and white supremacy, right? Which is a new thing. It's not how we're taught American history. It's not how we come to understand the history of our country. And even though I'm committed to anti-racism in my life and in my work, it was not a history that I knew. And I left the talk feeling completely changed. And that doesn't happen. I mean, that doesn't happen all that often. And as a filmmaker, together with my sister, I called up Emily and I said, we have to uplift this. We have to reach out to Jeff and see if there's any way we can help him get this talk to a wider audience.
Well, you mentioned getting it to a wider audience. So like, who is the audience for this talk/film? Who do you envision as the primary audience?
Any and everyone in America.
There's no one who sits through Jeff's talk or this film and doesn't learn something new. There are people that think that they're immersed in the history of this country, and they still have come up to us after seeing the film, or come up to Jeff after one of his presentations and have told him and us that there were things in it that totally rocked their world. So the audience is everybody. The entire country needs to have the creation myth of America redefined. I don't think you can really talk about, people talk about the concept of preaching to the choir or preaching outside the choir. And I don't think that's something that really applies to this film, because even if you you want to end racism, you see racism in your life, and you want to, or you experience racism in your life, right? That you might not know the history of, you know, most of us don't know this history. Jeff didn't know this history before he started making this film. And I think for people who are in the choir, have already committed themselves to anti-racism and want to end it, the film provides tools and language and history and facts to support those arguments with friends and family members who might not be there on the front lines of the fight, who might not understand how deep and systemic this racism is. And for people who aren't there yet, who aren't in the choir, it's a very welcoming, compassionate, generous film. I mean, Jeff's talk is, I think is very welcoming to people of different beliefs to kind of sit through this history and take it in.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, Jeffrey, your willingness to kind of reach out to people, I think was made pretty clear from that scene where you were talking to the gentleman who was in front of the Confederate monument. And I just like imagine myself in that situation. And like, I don't know if I could have been as even tempered as you seem to be there. But you said afterwards you're shown on, you know, the bus and you seem a little bit drained. And yet you were saying that, like, I know that people feel like some people seem hard to reach because they're not really, they're working with a different set of facts, or think they're working with a different set of facts, but who else is going to reach them? And so I guess I'm wondering if you could just like say more about that, because I think some people would say that you should just, some people are not going to listen to you. And you should talk to the people who will listen.
Well, I definitely agree with the fact that some people will not want to listen to this history, but I don't know who those people are. And so I'm not going to limit who I talk to about this by the fact that they're carrying a Confederate flag or the fact that they're expressing a certain idea, because you never know who you're going to engage and who you're going to have an impact on. I gave this talk in the Deep South once, and a gentleman came up to me and he told me this whole conference is about race and it pisses me off. This is a white gentleman. And then he looked me directly in the eye and he said, and your talk pissed me off even more, but your talk pissed me off because it made me think. And then he turned around and walked off. Had I seen that man before, I would have thought, I'll never reach him. And I have no idea what that man is doing now, what he thinks, how he behaves. But for at least a moment, he had an experience of cognitive dissonance. He had an experience of, my belief structure may be based on things that are absolutely not true. And so I think one of the reasons in the film that I was able to maintain my demeanor with Mr. Spivey is because I was really sick that day. I was in our hotel, or in the hotel I was staying in, feeling like I had the flu. And Sarah and Emily called me from the waterfront and said, this guy is down here and he's talking and you really got to come down here. So I did, and I'm glad I did. But I will say that I had questions about my interaction with him, and should I have shaken his hand, because a lot of the things he said disgusted me. And when he said that enslaved people were treated like family, we had just the day before been in the Charleston Slave Museum, the Slave Mart Museum, and seen the incredibly violent and sadistic ways that enslaved people were treated. And so it was very difficult to hold those images and listen to him say these things. But, the purpose was to engage him and to get him to try and talk to me. And I think he knew that everything he was saying was full of shit, quite frankly, pardon my French. He knew what he was saying didn't make any sense, but he just couldn't get away from it.
as you know, people who are trying to put that message out there, and writers, filmmakers, though, what do you do about people who are already plugged into like a totally different information stream? You know, I have people in my family who get all of their information from Fox or Breitbart or One America News. Is there a strategy or a way that you think about putting that message out, or is that even just like, well, that's, you know, we make the film, and if people come to it, that's, you know, the best we can hope for?
Well, making this film is part of that strategy. You know, making this film is creating this condensed version of Jeff's talk to be able to put it out there so people can reach across those lines and say, hey, maybe we can't talk about this. Maybe we can't sit down and have this conversation, but watch this. You know, watch this with me, for me, especially within families where there's trust there, or friendships. And hopefully this film can help to start some of those conversations. I mean, that was the reason we made this film. Sarah heard Jeff's talk, was so inspired by it, and this film inspires the activism within each of us. And Sarah and I, you know, use filmmaking as our activism, right? So hopefully people seeing this will have something fire up inside them too, and then try to find a way to either reach out to someone else and share this information to give them the tools to do that, or use the film itself as that bridge.
I also think it's important that this film is a collaboration between white and Black creators, because I think it's all of our responsibility to learn our country's painful history together. It's, you know, we all bear that responsibility of learning it and sharing it.
I agree with what Sarah and Emily have said. I think in a simple way, you can say this: if we do nothing, if we don't try and use this film to engage difficult conversations, if we just let things go on their course, we know exactly where that road leads. And so for me, it's a very simple thing. There is no alternative, because we have a long history of demonstrating what happens when we don't confront these issues directly, without subtext or subterfuge. And we can see in our history where it's led us. So we don't have a choice, in my view. So it's very easy to take on this task, because I don't see that there's any other road to go down.
And also, one of the goals of this film and the Who We Are project, the organization that Jeffrey has started, is to reach young people, before they have those fully formed, cemented ideas, before they're unreachable. And we're in the process of putting together companion educational material to bring this into high schools, maybe middle schools, certainly colleges, all age levels, to be able to reach when their minds are their most flexible, when their worlds can still be torn open.
And the way it counters the types of media that you're talking about is, it's not a film that says this is the truth and swallow. You go ahead and swallow it. Take this truth instead of the other truths you've been given. It's a film that says this is our history. Go out and study it. These are the words of our founding fathers from their own mouths, right? And that's what Jeff says again and again in the film, right? Is that I can't make this stuff up. Don't take it from me. So I think if we can help our young people become critical thinkers and investigators and truth seekers, or if this film can participate in helping young people do that, then that's the goal.
And I just want to echo with what Sarah and Emily are talking about. And I think it's very interesting that in two very different time periods, this very issue was identified by American leaders as being key. In 1837, John C. Calhoun, one of the most virulent racists in American history, vice president twice from South Carolina, he said, "The spirit of abolition is going to start to infect the minds of," and this is the phrase, the rising generation. And what he was concerned about is if the children understand what slavery really is, there's no way we're going to keep it going. So we have got to keep this information about what abolition is and the justification for abolition. We got to keep that away from these kids. That exact same phrase is used in the Trump administration's 1776 report that they released on the Monday before he left office, on the day we celebrate Martin Luther King's life and work. And they have pictures of Dr. King and some quotes from him in this report. And the report is a fantasy. And one of the things it says as its complete purpose is to make sure that the minds of the rising generation understand American history appropriately. So every politician in America has always understood that it is younger minds that are the key to where we're going in the future. George Orwell told us this when he said, "Who controls the past controls the future." And so by focusing on schools, and when I say schools, I mean pre-K through college. That's one of the buckets of education that the Who We Are project is focused on. Those other two buckets are the community at large, and the third bucket is government and corporate offices. And by educating people with our true history in all of those areas, I think we empower people to have different conversations about this subject matter. At a minimum, if somebody looks at this film and says, "I don't believe that," and they go starting to research, they're going to find exactly what I found. And at that moment, they have to say to themselves, what does this mean about why things are the way they are today? And those kind of questions, those kind of moments are moments America is in desperate need of.
That's really interesting. I mean, the fact that you're doing these things to kind of keep the message of the film going. And I'm wondering, the gentleman who was his name, Mr. Spivey or Spivey. So he's in the movie. Did he see the movie? Did he have any feedback? Did it make him think?
I don't know if he's seen it or not. I hope he sees it. And if he sees it, I'd be interested to hear what he thinks of it.
As far as we know, he hasn't seen it yet, but hopefully I'll have an opportunity to see it. I don't think he's on our mailing list.
So just going back a second to something, Jeffrey, you said about the things that you discovered. So I thought it was really interesting how you started off. I mean, the film, there are a lot of parts of this film that are personal, but you talk about the beginning of your own discovery of a lot of this history came after you had lived a lot of life, had a lot of education. But then you said, you had a conversation with your sister-in-law's son about race, and that made you feel like you were just surface skimming. So I'm curious about when you started diving below the surface, what was one of the things that for you became like a big tipping point in terms of, I have to really understand this? Was there like a particular historical fact, or was it a thing you read?
I think the most critical moment for me was not in any particular fact that I discovered, although I was discovering all kinds of things. I think the moment for me is when I was talking to my nephew/son about how he could survive encounters with police officers. And I realized that I was telling him the exact same thing that my father told me in the 1960s. And then I remembered even more that when my father told me those things, he told me that they were the exact same things that his father told him in the 30s and 40s. And that's when I got scared. That's why I started looking as much as I did, because I don't know what I was looking for, but I think in my fear, I just started reading. And so I discovered all kinds of things. I understood that there was slavery in the American colonies, but I didn't understand the way that the law entrenched that institution into American society. I had no idea that from 20 and odd enslaved people in 1619, that just 170 years later, that total was 700,000. So there are all kinds of facts that I learned along the way. And I guess the only other thing I would say is that all of the interviews we did, every time we would talk to someone, we would walk away thinking, okay, it can't get any more powerful than that. And that's what we would think until the next interview that we would do. And then we would think it can't get any more powerful than that. And we kept having that experience time and time again. And I think one of the things that sits with me still today is the time that Sarah and Emily and our companions, our coworkers, spent in a 15-person van driving around this country and talking to people, getting these stories. And there were many times where there was a whole lot of silence in that van, because after we come away from these stories, there's not a whole lot that you feel like you can say. So I think, understanding what I was saying to my nephew was shocking to me, that I was repeating something that was that old. And then as I started getting into the facts, every fact that I discovered that I hadn't known before, I just kept thinking, after Marquette University and Harvard Law School, how can I not know these things?
I guess continuing with that idea of like things we didn't know, and this is, I guess, for anybody in the process of making this presentation or this film, what is some aspect, I guess, of the history of anti-Black racism in America that you learned in the process of making it that left the biggest impression on you, or that surprised you the most?
I mean, there was so much, starting from what we learned from Jeffrey's presentation. Sarah and I grew up in New York City, and to find out that the mayor of New York had wanted to separate from both the North and the South so he could continue doing business with the North and business in the South, because the money coming into New York from the work and the products made by enslaved people was so immense that New York was built on that money. That was pretty shocking, because you think about slavery and you think about the South, but that's just a total false narrative. The entire country, I mean, New York is the financial center of the country, and it's always been. So of course it was intricately entwined with enslavement. That was shocking. The bricks, we visited the Slave Mart Museum in South Carolina, and the bricks in the walls of the museum itself. The museum was built on the site of a market for the sale of enslaved people. And there were these little finger marks in the bricks where the bricks had been made by the hands of enslaved people. And we learned this through our visit there. And it just changes the way you look at the cities across America, because those same fingerprints are in the bricks that have laid the foundation for this country. So you see that, and then you're walking around the city later and you say, wait a moment, I see more there, and I see more there, and there's so much more that I'll never see, but it's all here. So that was pretty revelatory for us.
Yeah, I mean, the making of this film was a lot about thinking of the process of memory and commemoration, and what we erect as a society to mark things, and what fades out of memory because there are no markers to it. Going from the platforms that used to hold Confederate statues in Memphis to the platforms in Tulsa that used to hold homes that, you know, which are now an area of town which we drive through, and I don't think there's a marker there, right? It's just a series of broken down stairs and empty platforms, and seeing how seeing how nature and a lack of care are kind of just taking those platforms back into the earth, right? And so I think, you know, making this film was a way of building a new monument for us. Every place we went was about holding, you know, reframing history and holding up moments of history and trying to control the past so we can help chart a better future together.
Jeffrey, did you want to add anything to that?
You know, over the years that I researched this, I had so many moments when I thought, WTF, how did I not know this? And so those moments were just continual throughout. I think if there was any moment for me there were so many powerful moments, but I think having the opportunity to remotely spend some time with Leslie Benningfield Randall, who was 100 and something years old, as she said, and that was something I'll never forget. And her memory of what happened is remarkable. And we had been trying to talk to her for some time, and she had been very sick, and we thought it's just not going to happen. And she had some good days, and folks put plastic up all around her house and plasticked her off so that she would be safe. And I was on remotely with her, but it felt like I was in the same room with her. And to hear her talk about the things that she saw as a young child that were still vivid in her memory is something I'll never forget.
I wonder, how do you all prepare people? I mean, you did several interviews with people who have experienced like just immense trauma or loss. How do you prepare people, I guess, for that? To go through that, to tell them, to tell your story to you.
I'm a criminal defense lawyer by trade. And so talking to people who have been through traumatic experiences and getting them to talk to you about those experiences is something that I did on a daily basis for my entire career. I think that helped. Sarah and Emily also were incredibly helpful just in suggesting questions that would let folks start to talk about their own experience. And I think a lot of it is just the ability to get out of the way and let someone tell you their own truth. And so I think that's what we tried to do. And the folks that we were interviewing, I think, could see the sincerity in our work and the way we were going about it. They saw that we considered it really important and that we respected and were going to take care to tell their stories in their own words. And I think that's why the interviews came off the way they did.
We were also really lucky in that we were traveling with Jeff, and in many of the cities or towns that we visited, Jeff would give his talk, and often he would give his talk before we conducted our interviews, and we would invite the people that we were seeking to interview to those presentations. And some of the time they were people who were hesitant to talk to us because they didn't know what purpose it would serve or what our motivations were, or what they were volunteering to be a part of. And I think seeing Jeff's talk enabled people to see what we were trying to do and helped us build trust as we traveled around the country.
Sarah's described it as a traveling tent revival of sorts. That we would show up to town in our van, set up our projection screen, put on a PowerPoint, and move hearts and minds, so that and also Jeff is just is such a generous person to talk to and to see in his presentation, but also to sit down with. He really brings people out of their shell. He's totally emotionally available to the people that he interviews. And I think that creates an environment where people are really comfortable telling their true stories.
I just realized that when you're talking about traveling, you mentioned traveling in a van. Like, you mean like you were like a rock band and 15 people on a... Don't people fly for this kind of thing?
Well, we'd fly in and then we'd rent the van and then drive around.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
There's a rap song that Jay-Z does where he talks about the bands who were lower rent than him. And he says, I'm flying over you and you're riding in the bus. We were those folks in the bus. We were not flying, we were in the bus. And I think I'm somewhat a child of the 60s and 70s. And so the first time Sarah mentioned tent revival, I immediately thought of Love, Brother Love's Travelin' Salvation Show. And there was a part of it as we traveled the country that really was just taking the opportunity to engage with people and giving this information in a talk, and then having really the privilege of having these folks share some very, very intimate parts of their lives with us. I really felt privileged to share that they would share those things with us. And I think all of us felt a responsibility to tell their stories in their words the way they wanted them told.
So, Jeffrey, I have 3 more questions for you. One is just about this metaphor about the tipping point that you bring back a few times in your presentation. And I wonder, I thought it was a really powerful metaphor, but then I thought about like what happens, when the ball gets to the other side of that hill, on Earth physics, that ball would start to kind of build momentum on the other side. And I guess I wonder if that's how you feel about it. Like if we can cross the tipping point, then this effort to dismantle systemic racism will sort of build steam as it goes.
I think that America, as we talk about in the film, America has been at tipping points on several occasions in our history on the issue of racial justice, and we have always rolled backward. Excuse me, my dad, who I think is one of the smartest men that I ever met, always used to say, if you are looking for an indication that things can actually change, you need to look for shit that you haven't seen before. And I think what he meant by that is part of what we're seeing today. When I go back and look at the demonstrations that occurred, the racial justice demonstrations in the 60s, all of those protest marches, there were white people in those marches, make no mistake about it. Those marches were overwhelmingly Black. And if you go back and look at the anti-Vietnam War marches, there were people of color in those marches, but those marches were overwhelmingly white. What we have seen in the last 18 months in America in terms of demonstrations across this country in cities large and small are people of every racial group in this country demonstrating together on the same issue. And America has not seen that before. There is one of the law professors I had, a man named Roberto Unger, who is one of the most brilliant people that I ever met in terms of my education. And he used to say, or he has said recently, that hope is not the cause is not what causes action. It's the other way around. Action is what causes hope. And so the reason I have hope is because I see the action that people are taking in the streets. I see HR 40, the bill for reparations to African Americans for slavery and the vestiges of slavery, which came after, having more support than it's ever had before. So I always say to myself, if you are looking for hope, the first place you need to look is in the mirror and ask yourself, what am I doing that would allow for people to feel hope? So I do feel hopeful. And I also feel that, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but you asked me. I think we're at a tipping point, and I think this is America's last best chance to get it right. Because if it rolls back from here, what we're rolling back to, I have no clue what that looks like. And I have no clue about how long it'll take to get out of wherever that destination is. So I am hopeful, but I am also concerned, because we have got to get it right this time.
I mean, you have a call to action at the end of your presentation where you say we can, we've gone through all this history, we're at a tipping point, and we can either sort of just turn on the television and la la la, or we can join the struggle. But I guess I wonder what you would say. I think a lot of folks would say that I'm against racism and I'm all for progress, but I'm not the type of person to take to the streets and protest. And I think there's a lot of people who would want to see change, but don't necessarily want to see their lives change, right? They can't they're busy juggling all the other things in their lives. So I guess what would you say to a person who's kind of sees themselves in this way?
I'm gonna see if Sarah and Emily have a comment, and then I'll comment at the end, because I definitely have something to say, but I'd like to hear what Sarah and Emily have to say.
I mean, you just made me think of one of the King clips we use in our film about how, people want change, they just don't want that change to cost them anything. And I think that what we need to understand is that it's not just that change costs us, it's that status quo costs us more, right? There's a tremendous tear in our country. And, it's not just, there's economic harm, there's emotional harm, there's trauma. And, I think that the cost of not doing something is a lot greater than the cost of doing something. I know that Jeff has been putting a lot of work into HR 40 and, the reparations bill. And I think that we have to move from thinking about the personal cost to us. We have to realize that the cost of not doing is more than the cost of doing. And it's a hard generation to be in. This is a difficult place for our country, right? It's easy to turn on the TV. It's easy to want to pass the buck to the next generation, but this is our charge. And it's better on the other side if we take it up. And Jeff, I
guess I would just add, America kind of went gollywag over Amanda Gorman on the inauguration day when, she just delivered such brilliant words. And one of the things that she says that I think just hits home so ugly and so powerfully, and something that no one can deny, regardless of what your political stripe. Our blunders will be the burdens of our children. There's no question about it. Our children are going to pay for what we do and what we don't do on this issue. And so if you're thinking about it like that, well, I don't want my world to be upended or to be changed. I'm in a comfortable place. I want to maintain that comfort. What are you willing to do to make sure that your children have a better life? Are you willing to save money and not spend it on certain things that would make your personal life more comfortable? Parents do that all the time. Are you willing to sacrifice your time and your mental ability, your ability to be present with someone so that your kids have a good life? Parents do that all the time. So I think, this comes back to the rising generation and just what it is that we're looking for. So I would kind of tell people, go and look at your 6-year-old and tell your 6-year-old, I don't give a shit whether you grow up in a racially torn country, because I want to maintain whatever comfort I feel I have right now. Go tell that to your 6-year-old. And I don't think there's any parent in America who's willing to do that. So to me, I mean, it's completely understandable. Nobody wants to give up something that they have, but I think that's a false equivalence. That's the whole debate about reparations. You're going to take something away from one group and give it to another group. Who said that? Whoever said that? Do you think America would be better if the Black community had an economic level that was 5 to 10 times higher than it has right now? Do you think corporate America would like having a whole bunch of people who can spend more money on their products? Do you think that cities would be better if people could pay taxes and contribute to the infrastructure of the city? This isn't about giving somebody something and taking it away from somebody else. All of us are stuck in this together. And so it is a failure to recognize that lets this narrative pit people against each other. There is a cost to doing nothing, and that cost is going to be paid by our children and their children. And so I know that this problem is not going to be resolved in my lifetime. I'm 65 years old in August of this year, and I've still got a whole lot of life left in me, but I know that this work is going to have to continue after I die, and I'm okay with that. But I think if everybody would look at their children or their nieces or their nephews and ask themselves, just what do we want to leave them? I think people would find it very easy to get off the couch and start thinking about ways to contribute to the struggle for racial justice that would not cost them a thing, and the benefit they get would be unbelievable.
Well, that's actually a good, look into the future sort of leads to my last question, which is, I think, when we look forward, I wonder if we can just do a quick lightning round to close things out. If each of you could name 1 or 2 policy proposals, policy issues that, if somebody's fired up and they want to start Googling stuff and learning about how to get involved or how to learn more, what are 1 or 2 things that you want to put on people's radars? Some policy things that people can go find out about and maybe get involved with.
I would just say, for me, very simply, go to the National African American Reparations Commission website and start finding out about HR 40 and separate the myth from the fact and come to understand exactly what that bill is designed to do. And then talk to your elected officials, because this bill has a chance. There are all kinds of roadblocks, but this bill has more support than it has ever had in American history. So this is a critical time for that bill.
And Emily and Sarah, anything you want to put on people's radars?
I don't know that we have anything.
We're not really policy people.
But, I think that we definitely need to be thinking about the right to vote right now, which is being threatened in a number of states. We need to, look critically at the laws that are being passed in Florida, in Texas, in Georgia, and help help participate, help educate our friends and our neighbors and our family members about what's happening, because this is our voice. This is our country, and our vote is our voice. And what's happening with voting is one of those things that could definitely push that tipping point in the wrong direction.
And also, you know, the organization that Jeffrey is setting up, the whowearecampaign.org, no, whoweareproject.org, sorry, is going to have a page of resources, a page to direct people to find out different ways to get involved. So I would recommend that as a resource as well.
Can I say one last thing? Because I think I appreciate what Sarah and Emily added. And the last thing I would say, and this is similar to the issue about voting, there are all kinds of states now that are trying to outlaw, quote unquote, critical race theory from being taught in their schools. The presentation that I give, if these laws are passed, might be outlawed in some states. And this is going back to that President Trump's 1776 report. They're saying the only history that should be taught is history that uplifts America and shows us in the best light. So when you hear, what I would say to people is educate yourselves about these bills that are going to restrict what's taught in your schools. Because there are places in America right now in AP classes in Florida a couple of months ago, there's now an investigation for a teacher, a white teacher, telling his class that the N-word has no racial implications whatsoever. A white teacher also telling his class enslaved people were never whipped by their masters. When in the freaking film, we have the letter, the newspaper ad from Andrew Jackson saying, you can hit this slave with a whip. I'll give you $10 extra for every 100 lashes you give him. So the myths that are being taught as truth are critical to where this country is going. Who controls the past controls the future. So you should be concerned about any law that says that the truth cannot be taught in your schools.
Well, Jeffrey, Emily, Sarah, thank you so much for letting me ask you about your film. And Brian, I guess I'd throw it back to you.
Yeah, I would just like to ask one more question. You know, Emily and Sarah, I'm sure a lot of our viewers will want to share this film and share this discussion beyond this festival. So can you talk a little bit about what the next steps are for the film and how it's rolling out?
We will be playing at more festivals. We hope to get wide distribution to get this out to theaters and to homes and to schools across the country. We're actively working on that plan. And I think if for viewers, audience members who want to be kept abreast of our plans, the best thing to do is to follow our social media where we will be making those announcements. And also to become part of our core word of mouth, crew, to join the Who We Are project in sharing these details with their communities.
Thank you so much. Adrian, thanks for moderating this. Emily, Sarah, and especially Jeffrey, thank you so much for sharing this important work with us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.